In 1971, Roger and Andrea Davies had a baby girl named Lucy, followed a little later by a second daughter, Anna. The family lived in South Wales in the county of Rhondda Cynon Tove, a small village in the Glencock area. This settlement abounded with wooden buildings and graceful mountain scenery. Here passed Lucy's happy childhood. With her sister, she almost never quarreled, and they had many similar hobbies and tastes. When Lucy studied in junior high school, stood out sociability and kindness. She was loved by both classmates and teachers. In addition, the girl also possessed a magnetic charm and attractiveness, which allowed her to achieve great popularity at school. In addition to academic interests, she had the following hobbies: a love for horses, especially ponies. Her father even enrolled her along with her sister in the local equestrian club. This is how the girls mastered horseback riding and even participated in various championships. Playing the flute and piano. She practiced diligently, and it gave results after a year. The student performed difficult classical pieces without much trouble. Inclusion in the Glamorgan Orchestra, made up of young talents. Such a gifted performer could not fail to be noticed and invited. While studying in middle school, Lucy met a guy, Gareth Jenkinson. They soon began a stormy romance. In 1988, the girl graduated from school and planned to become a professional musician. To do this, she went to neighboring England in Warwickshire County to enter the local university for a bachelor's degree. An exciting new life began, and Lucy aspired to become a professor of music and teach this art to others. But one day, her views changed dramatically, and she began a thorough study of urbanism. By then, her romance with Gareth had already ended, flaring up and going out like a bundle of straw. Her new boyfriend was Grimy McAllister. They had met on the basis of similar hobbies and love of music. They were especially drawn together by their specific sense of humor. Their relationship developed rapidly, and soon the girl introduced the suitor to her parents. He caused them a lot of sympathy, and those considered him the ideal for their daughter. On this wave, the parents bought a house for the young couple in Coventry, so that the lovers did not wander around in rented apartments. When Lucy and Grimy were still in college, they had a son, whom they named James. This happened in 1995. The student even had to take a leave of absence, and the father of the child continued his studies and at night worked as a loader or watchman. After about 5-6 months, Lucy began to strain such a life. She was consumed by homesickness, all the time with the child, boyfriend, then at the institute, then at work. And she found solace in online chat rooms, where she made an account under the nickname Miseria. Here, the girl looked for friends by interests, and one day met with 53-year-old American Garrod Landry. He lived in Louisiana. In correspondence, he admitted that he grew up in a very poor family. He had many brothers and sisters, and he early began to earn his own money and hard work. Thanks to his strong-willed efforts, he got out of a difficult situation. A little later, he carefully studied the oil business and realized that the best profits here are achieved by those who supply well owners with the necessary equipment for the extraction of the resource. So Harold founded his own firm, specializing in the creation of such infrastructure. And soon, lucrative contracts were signed with major oil companies from the southern United States. Business was excellent, and the man amassed a billion-dollar fortune. At the moment of acquaintance with a bored young mom, he demonstrated his financial achievements in the form of expensive purchases, photos of the house on the Mexican island of Cozumel, and no doubt made a huge impression on the girl. He did not hide his marital status: 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and more than 4 children. In 1992, Landry officially dissolved the marriage with his second wife and got acquainted with a young, searing Mexican Geraldine Price, who was older by 20 years. She met Harold, being herself married with 2 children. Only these factors did not confuse the confident American who managed to bewitch this girl. And for some period of time, their meetings took place secretly. So, February 6, 1994, he picked up Geraldine to show her New Orleans, and for her children hired a nanny, Kristen Hurton. After the date, Harold took the young mistress back to the children, then offered the nanny a ride to her home, and she happily agreed. Everything was going swimmingly. so Landry assumed. Except that Geraldine's husband, his name was Chris, was aware of the date and had been watching the lovers all evening and following them to every place they visited. When Harold drove away from his Pesora's house, her husband headed after him in his automobile. Such pursuit was quickly calculated, and Landry pulled a pistol from the glove compartment just in case. Gradually, the distance between the cars shortened, and at a stop because of a red traffic light warning, Chris decided to attack his wife's lover. He got out of the car and approached his rival's vehicle, shouting and threatening. Harold rolled down his window, showed the aggressor a gun, and threatened to shoot him if he did not calm down. In response, Chris got even more angry, took his opponent on weakness, and provoked a shot. The bullet hit him in the neck, but the wound was not fatal, and the victim managed to get to the nearest hospital, which was literally 150 meters from the scene. There he received the necessary assistance, and Harold was facing an attempted murder charge for that shot and the resulting gunshot wound. In addition, he had a terrified Kristen in his car at the time, whom he was driving home. She testified to the police. The man was tried in 1997, with a hearing held in Santa Maria Parish. Attorney Pat Fanning built the initial defense on the theory that his client in this story is a victim of tragic circumstances, was greatly frightened by Chris's aggressive behavior, and acted solely in self-defense. Both the shooter and the victim acted in their own best interest in that situation. The defense in court worked cohesively, and 12 jurors, 4 men, 8 women, found the defendant guilty, but only of aggravated assault. And the sentence was quite mild, only 5 years in prison. A little later, the lawyer again distinguished himself, advising his client to appeal for parole. And so it happened. Only the court obliged to pay $500 fine and work hours of community service. Total exoneration proved to be an unattainable goal, but even without it, Harold Landry got off easy in this story. He generously paid for the attorney's work, then they even became friends. A little later, by mutual agreement, Chris, as the victim, received compensation, the exact amount of which is unknown. Presumably, it is more than $150,000. At the time of meeting the girl, American lived in Covington and still had a decent financial condition that allowed him not to work. The American revealed his past life to Lucy, confessed his income, marriages, divorces, a shot in the man, and a prison sentence. And such facts did not repulse the girl at all, but increased her interest in the interlocutor in the chat. Their communication became longer and longer, and the young bored mom was fascinated by her new acquaintance from across the ocean. The impressions were so strong that she did not need Greamy, who was going out of his way to provide maintenance for her and the child. Lucy's breakup with Greamy became one of Harold's conditions for coming to England and transferring the relationship from virtual chat to real communication and meetings. The American did not want to repeat the situation, as with Geraldine and Chris. And in the early 2000s, the overseas visitor came to England to see Lucy. She met him at the airport. For some time, they drove around Coventry, visiting pubs and other places. A week later, the girl decided to present such a noble man to his parents in the status of a fiancé. They were surprised by the impressive age difference between their daughter and her chosen one, but they respected her choice and did not prevent such a union. Lucy was over the moon with happiness. Harold gave her maximum attention and pampered her with luxury gifts and fulfilled many of her wishes. He was so in love with her that he was ready to marry her. The American was going to make a proposal, and in a very refined way, but it required time for preparation. And for the realization of the plan, he called his beloved on an amazing trip to Mexico. The girl confused only one fact. In this voyage went and her son James and former boyfriend Grimy. There Harold had his own house lined up, and next door neighbored the same lawyer, Pat Fanning. The groom had purchased a gorgeous diamond ring and was going to present it at the most interesting moment. He shared his ideas with Pat, only the friend did not take the news with joy because he suspected Lucy in some secret plan. The lawyer noticed that the girl spent too much time with her ex, warned his friend about it, but he, blinded by love, and was not going to abandon the plan. And in the evening, at a fancy dinner, made an offer to Lucy to become his wife. Ta, with great joy, agreed. Their wedding took place in mid-2003. The event cost about $1 million. The couple went on a romantic honeymoon trip. Then the husband bought a house for $1 million in an upscale neighborhood in Warwickshire County, near the area of Pershore. At the start, their family life was full of idyll and prosperity. No small contribution to the tranquility contributed, and wonderful neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy. With them, the couple became friends quite quickly. Soon, Lucy gave birth to the firstborn for Harold, a daughter. Her newlyweds named Harriet. They gave her as much time as possible, while not forgetting about James, Lucy's child from Grimy. Everything was going fine, but gradually the relationship deteriorated. The husband's demands on his wife increased, and the wife's moods often changed, and there was a confrontation. Harold called for obedience and compliance with his interests. Lucy, this fact greatly irritated. Tensions were rising in rapid progression, and the wife, with her straightforwardness, boldly expressed her ideas, causing anger in her husband. A confrontation between two strong personalities was formed. After heated arguments, there would be a truce, and then it was back to squabbling. Often already grown up, James became an eyewitness to such scandals, heard their squabbles and neighbors. Gradually, alcohol became the fuel for the conflicts. Both Rachel and Stephen knew this, and so the shouting could go on day and night. When the squabbling died down, the couple simply stopped communicating. There was a feeling that their communication was realized only in scandals. During the period of silence, the neighbors hoped for a quick peace. In 2009, Lucy was disappearing more and more in social networks and accidentally found the page of Gareth, her school beau. Their correspondence began. They did not disclose aspects of their personal lives, but discussed almost anything, from work to new movies. Communication continued through the nights as soon as Harold fell asleep. But one day he woke up suddenly and found his wife engaged in such correspondence. She was doing to him what she had once done to Grimy, engrossed in an online conversation with another man. Her current husband did not scandalize about it, although he felt great resentment. There was also a fear of his wife's imminent departure and another divorce. Harold realized that the wife is tired of quarrels and needs a break, and decided to change the situation himself and went to Mexico for a while. Meanwhile, his wife took advantage of the situation and invited her high school sweetheart to visit. What they did there remains to be guessed. At first, neighbors thought that the couple finally reconciled, but disbelieved when they saw Gareth leaving the house. Harold spent almost the entire summer of 2009 in Mexico, returning home in the fall with one main goal: to save his marriage. Only upon arrival, he was in for a very unpleasant surprise. His wife had already filed for divorce. The man was devastated. For a while, he even rented an apartment to get away from such a shock. Once walking in his neighborhood, he met a charming woman who introduced herself as Rachel Wallbangs. He was seriously attracted to her, and thoughts of Lucy and divorce receded into the background. His new relationship began, and in parallel, the process of dissolution of marriage. Conflicts continued, especially acute were disputes over real estate. Lucy's position is that she and the children remain in the house. Harold's proposals: an impressive amount of money to buy a good apartment. The husband, with the help of a lawyer friend, excluded his wife from the will. This maneuver sent her into a wild rage. More yelling and fighting. James was also admonished by his mother about how Harold was bad and should be hated. The divorce proceedings were complicated, extremely stressful. Gareth invited Lucy to Wales to unwind and decompress. She instantly rushed to him and openly told his spouse where she was going and with whom she would have a great time. Paradoxically, but in such a vague period, the spouses continued to drink alcohol together and more often. And after drinking, they had another scandal. February 1st, 2010, first half of the afternoon. Harold had a few glasses of wine and was strutting around outside the house. A delivery man arrived and mistakenly handed him a package intended for his neighbor, Stephen Kennedy. At 9 p.m., the neighbor arrived home, saw an email saying the package had been delivered and given to Landry. Stephen saw a light on in Harold's house and went there to get his item. The door was opened by the owner, and he immediately offered a glass of wine. Stephen accepted, but refused a larger portion, took the package, and left. He did not like the company of the already heavily intoxicated Harold. After that, the couple had nothing to be embarrassed about, and there was a new quarrel, this time over furniture. Little James could not stand these squabbles and immediately ran away and lurked in the yard. Only this time the quarrel turned into a fight. The husband grabbed a frying pan and hit his wife on the cheek with it. She screamed in pain, and her son came running to the noise. The woman was bleeding profusely. James was not confused and called the police and promptly got his younger sister out of the bedroom. While the squad was en route, the mother and children got out of the house and headed to Stephen's house to wait for the police to arrive. But Harold caught up with them and stabbed Lucy several times and dragged her body into the bushes, and the children ran away in a panic. Stephen ran out at the screams, found Lucy in the bushes. At first he thought that she was just very drunk, but when he saw a lot of blood, he appreciated the tragedy of the situation. At that moment, Constable Steve Cox arrived, quickly called an ambulance, and began to search the area in search of Harold Landry, but found only shocked children. They had hidden in a closet and were crying. Medics arrived quickly enough, taking the victim to the nearest hospital. But despite all their efforts, she could not be saved. And almost immediately after arriving at the hospital, she died. And Harold, who escaped, was visiting his new passport. Rachel, to her, he confessed to what he had done, but without details, and asked her to keep silent. And he valued her silence at $40,000. He transferred that amount in 3 transactions. In addition, he handed over several thousand in cash, car keys, and several certified checks. Thinking the police had already left his house, he went there, but he was wrong, and on the way, they picked him up. Lucy's parents were heartbroken when they received the news of her death. The police only expressed their condolences and informed them that the murderer had already been arrested. From that moment on, Roger and Andrea Davis's attention was fixed on their grandchildren. In the forensic report, the cause of Lucy's death was listed as multiple stab wounds to the chest. Testimony was also given by James. These materials were sufficient to take the case to trial. The first hearing was held on February 5, 2010. The venue was Warwickshire Crown Court. There, Landry was charged with premeditated murder. The second hearing was held in February 2011. Place, England, Wolverhampton, the Royal Courts of Justice. The judge was appointed David Foskett, the prosecutor, Prosecutor Rachel Brand. Harold's close friend, Barrister Pat Fanning, refused to defend him this time. The job fell to Andy Childs. The lawyer realized that the case is almost hopeless for his client, and his line built on the basis of constant aggressive actions of Lucy Davis, who provoked her murder. Giving testimony, Harold often stopped to sob, shouted that he loved his wife, and repented for what he had done. He pleaded guilty to unplanned murder, but his wife had brought him to this point. The prosecutor based his position on the excessive cruelty of Harold and presented the court with the conclusion of forensic experts and images displayed on the screen. All present in the courtroom were horrified by the picture, and this fact was decisive for the verdict. February 24, 2011, the date of the penultimate session. It lasted almost 4 hours, and the jury announced their verdict. Harold Landry was guilty of murdering his wife. She was 38 at the time of her death, and her killer was 64. The next day was the final hearing, at which the judge announced the verdict. He rebuked the defendant for an inexcusable act and rejected all his inquiries about potential provocation on the part of the victim. Such a move was interpreted as a way of escaping from the deserved punishment. Neither tears nor remorse helped the perpetrator. As a result, the harshest verdict after the death penalty was pronounced: life imprisonment. At the same time, the defendant gets the right to apply for parole after 16 years in prison, guilty in prison. The relatives of the deceased Lucy thanked the court for its excellent work and adequate sentence. The prosecution and the jury accurately felt the pain of loss and competently expressed on this crime. Although some insisted on the death penalty, and no matter how much the killer received, even 200 years, it will not bring back Lucy. Harold himself did not hide ambitions to remove the sentence, being in prison, said of his innocence, and once said that he was ready to go back to that night and kill his promiscuous wife again. And Lucy's parents promised that they would never forget their radiant and cheerful daughter and the goodness she gave to those around her. They hoped that James and Harriet would inherit their mother's best characteristics and continue her mission in this world.